You need to have a clean saw for a number of different reasons. One of the primary reasons is that when you're running your tools over the saw, the rust on it is pretty abrasive, and if you don't take the rust off of it, you'll wear your tools out pretty rapidly. A saw that has rust and pitch on it will tend to bind in the kerf. Another reason that you want a clean surface, a flat surface, is that when you're using the spider on the saw, which is a tool that looks like this, when you put the spider on the saw, if you have bits of dirt and pitch on there, it'll end up resulting in having a mismeasurement of your set. Normally, what I end up doing for cleaning is that I'll use an axe stone, which is just a round stone, and I'll liberally douse the saw with some sort of a solvent. Normally, I'll use a petroleum solvent because if you have pitch on the saw, the petroleum solvent will cut the pitch and make it easier to do your cleaning. The reason for using a fluid at all is that if you don't, the pores in the stone will end up plugging up pretty quickly and your stone won't cut anymore. Okay, so now we've got this saw laid out here, and I'm going to be using a kerosene solvent to clean the rust and pitch off of it. So in order to do that, what I'll do is go ahead and put on a pair of goggles in case I get any splashing from the kerosene, and a pair of rubber gloves to keep it off my hands. Generally, with the stone that you haven't used before, it'll be pretty dry, and so it's a good idea to put a little bit of kerosene on the stone to get it soaking up. I can put the stone up here like this and let the kerosene soak into it. And then I'll just take kerosene and liberally douse the saw like that. And with the stone, I just spread the kerosene around so that it will start softening any pitch that might be on there. And then I'll start at one end of the saw generally, and with a good firm pressure on the stone, making sure that you keep your fingers up above the surface of the stone so you don't get your fingers into the teeth. Just a flat pressure on it. I'll start working back and forth on the saw like this, and just removing the rust and the pitch. It's important that when you're using a stone like this to get up and clean the teeth themselves, but make sure that you don't actually get up and take metal off of the cutter tips, because what that'll do is that it will actually reduce the set that's in the saw, and it'll shorten the teeth. So clean up to the tips, but don't actually take metal off of the tips of the teeth. There are numerous different solvents which can be used for cleaning a saw. The primary purpose for using the solvent at all is to keep the stone free from the rust, and also to dissolve any pitch that might have gotten stuck to the saw last time it was used. So you can use kerosene or diesel, or you could use WD-40. You could use turpentine probably. Any of those solvents would work pretty well. With a saw that's rusty but doesn't have any pitch on it, there's no reason that you couldn't actually use water, because again, the primary reason for using a solvent is to cut your pitch. Clean your rakers quite well so that they're shining. And the reason for that is that a lot of these saws you'll have to heat treat later, and you can't do a good job of heat treating them unless you have a good shiny surface to watch the colors run. So you notice I'm keeping my fingers up on the stone, so there's no chance of getting my fingers mixed up with the tips of the cutter teeth there. Now again, I usually like to run the stone the length of the saw, and even when I'm doing the rakers and the cutter teeth, rather than going up and down the teeth, because going up and down the teeth will leave vertical scratches on the saw. You may be able to see some in here where this has been previously cleaned with a stone whose action has been up and down, and you can see that the scratch marks in it. Try to use the stone back and forth the length of the saw like this. These axe stones generally have two different grits on them. There's a coarse grit and a fine grit. I almost always use the fine grit just because there's less likelihood of scratching the saw. If I have a saw that has a lot of rust on it, it's a seriously rusty saw, I'll end up using the coarse side just for the initial work to clean the worst of it off, and then I'll use the fine grit. But I really prefer just using an axe stone like this, or a substitute if you don't have an axe stone is actually to use a rectangular carborundum stone like this. That will work pretty well, just using the same procedure as the axe stone. It doesn't fit the hand quite as well, but it's quite satisfactory. Because this is a fair amount of work, I mean, it does take quite a bit of elbow grease, especially if you've got very much rust on the saw. And so there's a great temptation to use power tools to take the rust off, like an angle grinder or power grinder, or even a belt sander. And I generally discourage people from using a tool like that, because it's very easy, especially with a belt sander, to get it up over the tips of the teeth and really remove material from the tips of the teeth. And that can not only shorten the teeth, but essentially put a reverse set in the tooth, which is very, very difficult to take out. One of the issues with an angle grinder or a rotary grinder is that unless you move the tool evenly back and forth on the surface of the saw, it's really easy to make dig marks in it, to actually dig right into the surface of the saw and put divots in it. So if you're using a power tool like that, either a belt sander or an angle grinder, be really careful to stay away from the tips of the teeth, and use a fine abrasive so you don't unduly etch or scratch the surface of the saw.